Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. At this point in the class, we have seen and read about the waging conflict that has gripped America. We are coming into the most critical years of the war and the greatest battle fought that would be the turning point of the entire conflict. Up to this point, we've explored the various failings and losses the Union was suffering. President Lincoln was growing ever more exasperated by Union commanders who consistently blew caution to the wind, were too defensive, or were otherwise incapable of tactical leadership. This is where we find our focus of this week's lecture, Major General George Gordon Meade's and the Battle of Gettysburg. This is a brief lecture and by no means inclusive to the entire battle. Be sure to check the readings this week for an in-depth study of the battle, including Meade at Gettysburg, a study at command, and Chapter 9, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, in the Civil War, A Concise History. By now you should recognize that the world of America during the Civil War was much different than it is today. Often we mistakenly put our time in the past and try to make sense of it, but that only skews the truth. This is one of the vital reasons for exploring the primary sources that I have signed, including the letters of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw and of President Lincoln. The Battle of Gettysburg between Meade and Lee occurred from July 1st, 1863 to July 3rd. 3 days of some of the most worst fighting, the most loss of life, and the greatest victory the Union had of the entire war. Gettysburg was the turning point and the breaking point of the Confederate Army. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is a small, unassuming town that had not seen fame before the gray forces and blue forces of great men clashed on their fields. The battle might not have ever taken place there. It was by pure accident that the battlefield was chosen at Gettysburg. One of the significant reasons the battle was fought there was around what Robert E. Lee's goal was at the time. His goal was the second invasion of the North as he headed up to Baltimore. Both Lee and Meade knew that a confrontation would soon occur as the Army of West Virginia moved northward towards Baltimore and the Army of the Potomac followed northward to answer. The surprise was that it occurred at Gettysburg. To this point, the Confederates were securing strategic victories that were far outclassing the struggling Union Army. Only a few days prior, President Lincoln had ordered General Meade, to command the Army of the Potomac, an honor which he took with dignity. In Meade's official response to General Order 67, in which he was appointed general, he wrote, "By direction of the President of the United States, I hereby assume command of the Army of the Potomac. As a soldier, in obeying this order, an order totally unexpected and unsolicited, I have not promise of pledges to make. It is with great indifference that I relieve in the command of this army an eminent and accomplished soldier whose name must ever appear conspicuous in the history of his achievements." Even in his taking of command, he had nothing but good things to say about his predecessor. The Army of the Potomac had seen numerous commanders up to this point, up to a total of 4 different commanders until Meade took leadership, some of them only lasting a few weeks. However, no one could foresee the wisdom in Lincoln's choice until July 3rd. The first day of the conflict on July 1st did not go well for the Union. Much like in the past, the Union forces, especially those under the commander of General John F. Reynolds, took huge losses and were pushed back far out of Gettysburg by Confederate General Hill. These huge losses were more in strategic position rather than in men, and so by the end of the first day, Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill were stabilized for the Union with reinforcements from General Winfield Scott. Even with these reinforcements, it was starting to look like exactly what the Union had accomplished before: failure. Throughout the first day of fighting, the Union suffered incredible defeats. Near the end of the day, most of the Union forces had withdrawn to more defensible positions, and 15,000 men were dead. Moving to the second day of the battle, the Union faced even more dire situations. Famously, Meade organized his forces in a hook shape, using the various commanders underneath him. He established this force into a fishhook shape, with the top of the hook near Cemetery Hill, with an overall strength of 69,000 men. This was a strong central defense strategy, and Meade had to rely on the competency of his commanders. This was the same day that the infamous battle at the Peach Orchard and Daniel Sickles' brigade. This action created a dangerous salient. You see, Daniel Sickles had decided to move his men because he believed that they would have a more defensible position further up the hill. This action, the salient, is a military term which means being in danger of being attacked on 3 sides instead of 1 side. From Samuel Drake, from the book The Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, he wrote, "His orders were either vague or unsatisfactory, and so Sickles, commander of a single corps of the army, having convinced himself that the line as formed was defective, determined in his own mind to abandon it for this own choosing, orders or no orders." Sickles had disobeyed Meade, believing that moving his men further up that hill would provide a more advantageous position. He was mistaken, and instead created this deadly salient, and Sickles would nearly lose his entire force, and he would be grievously wounded himself. Meade had a tremendous challenge. The second day of fighting had caused even more trouble for his battered forces. However, valiant efforts were being made by some of his commanders, such as Colonel Joshua Lawrence in the 20th Maine Regiment that held the line at Little Round Top. Meade had no choice after the massive losses from Sickles' disobedience but to shore up the forces that he had lost, and in doing so, General Greene, one of the other commanders, with little over 1,400 men, were left with little over 1,400 men to defend Culp's Hill. Meade had ordered earlier in the day that General Greene build strong fortifications to protect the vital Baltimore supply line that was vital for the Union. Greene and his men had valiantly defended against a superior Confederate force that attacked Culp's Hill repeatedly in wave after wave. The Union was able to defend the hill, and their line held. By the end of the second day, the Union held on to their significantly advantageous positions, but had suffered heavy casualties. The day before American Remembrance of Independence, the final day of the battle concluded. Meade and his commanding cabinet would be tested once again by Lee. The ill-fated Pickett's charge was the last major surge in the battle. General Pickett would lead over 12,000 men in a heroic yet dangerous charge at the middle of the Union's forces. Unknown to his forces, the Union still had ammunition left in their cannons, and their artillery barrages would cut down massive numbers of the Confederate forces. The Union very nearly lost against this bold attack by Lee, but the line held, and the Confederates began a hasty retreat. The Confederate army had no choice but to retreat at this point, and the Union had won, but with over 50,000 men were dead, and many more thousands were wounded and maimed. The retreating and battered Confederate army caused quite the controversy in the future. Under the leadership of Major General Meade, the Army of the Potomac had indeed handed the Union its first major victory. The limping Confederate army, however, was now hastily retreating, and a golden opportunity lay before Meade. Or did it? The debate between whether Meade should have pursued the retreating Lee and his army or not has remained one of the most hotly contested debates among historians. While Meade gave the Union its victory, it was not enough to many, and including the President. President Lincoln, who wrote of his displeasure in this unsent letter, he wrote, "Again, my dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape." Meade was so eviscerated by the media that he would even face a war conduct hearing to determine his eligibility of command. The reason that Lincoln's letter was unsent, or that it was written in the first place, has to do with the journalism done by the war journalists that were everywhere at the time. This war conduct, by the way, was headed by none other than General Daniel Sickles, the same man who had disobeyed Meade much to his own destruction and his own commands, or his own men's destruction. The legacy of this battle is that it was the turning point of the war. The important thing to remember from this battle is the drastic hope that the war would end soon. It would not, however, and much to the dismay of the country. Meade's leadership at Gettysburg is a principal reason that the Union won that battle. But his victory and credit was shrouded by a man who would end up becoming president, General Grant. Meade was a steadfast commander who, after 3 days, won the respect of many of his men. A few critics, such as Daniel Sickles, were among those who disobeyed him to his own destruction, and even the president was disappointed in Meade. But Meade would go on to remain the finest of military generals that the Union ever had. Be sure to read the chapters this week, and we'll be working on your annotated bibliographies. If you want to read more about Meade, a great collection is the Life and Letters of George Gordon Meade, which you can find in the additional resources area. God bless.